let's recap what we have done so far. Basically, we have finished implementing the two components in the model view controller pattern. We have done a view and we have done a controller. Okay, let's see how we have done that very quickly. So as a quick review. So for the view, we can see that under app and under RESTful resources, under layout, we got this XML file. And there are two possible views for us to do the design. Either the design graphical view and also the texture view for the XML documents. But in general, it's more advised that you actually go to a piece of paper and do the design on the paper like this. And then once you have done, because you're actually more flexible for you to move things around when you do on the paper. And once you're done with this, you can do a straightforward translation into the corresponding GUI components on Android Studio. It's more advised rather than going to the Android Studio directly for your GUI design. Okay, do it on the paper and then do a direct translation. Okay, so these are the two things. And then if you look at, for example, the design view over here, you can see component tree for every GUI components there. So here we only got 3 components: text view, edit text, and also button. Okay, and for each one of them, so there are 3 things you have to know very well. One is the unique identifier, which is used by the controller to retrieve what's really entered in that particular GUI component. For example, if I enter Jackie over here, it can be retrieved by the controller if the controller can provide this particular ID, which is called input name. So that's why the input name must be unique, because if there's any duplicate, then there'll be confusion about which GUI components you want to retrieve. And also we got some text over here. And this one over here, answer, is a special text view where it's going to display the answer. So of the computation of the BMI. Initially, it's simply going to say answer, but as we try to compute for different persons, according to their weights and heights, this display must change. So it's going to be done by the controller. Okay, but for the view, you can see the view itself is very simple. It's only about, let's just go back to this, our initial diagram here. For the view here, it's only provide a place for you to enter the inputs and display the outputs. Actually, let me use this new diagram here. That's neater. So the view is actually for this two jobs that are of a similar nature. It's going to for the user to enter the inputs and also to display the output for the user. So again, it's just an interface. It's basically some simple graphical user interface for the user to interact with your app. Okay, and there's no intelligence whatsoever in the view. It only provides a place to enter and display. Okay, and then we move on to controller. And the controller is actually to be modified in this particular file under app and under Java and under this EECS1022.bmi, and usually with the activity postfix. Okay, and this file over here, and of course we haven't really learned Java programming yet in the course, but as we learn along, hopefully the code will make more sense to you, but try to understand as much as possible. Basically, this particular onCreate method has been generated when we first created the project. Don't touch it. And then we define 2 helper methods for us to use to retrieve the contents of the GUI and also to change their contents. So the first one is called set contents of TextView. So this is the name of the method, and it's going to do some magic over here, but I'll try to explain along the course. So this method here is going to retrieve, is going to change the contents of the text view. For example, if you can give the ID for this particular answer, this answer text view, which is labeled answer, we can retrieve it and set its content from answer to some computational result for the BMI. And then the second helper method there is called get input of text field. Okay, so this one here is given an ID for the text field, we can retrieve what's being entered there. For example, if I can give you the ID for this particular text field, whose ID is input name, I can retrieve the enter value, for example, Jackie. And also, if I give the ID for this particular weights over here, whose ID is input weights, I can also retrieve what's being entered there as a string, not a number. So what the controller can first do is to retrieve every input as a string. For example, let's say if I enter 70 as the input, when the controller retrieve, it doesn't retrieve 70 right away. It retrieves a string of 2 characters, 7 and 0. And similarly, if I give also the ID for input heights, and you will also retrieve the you can also retrieve the height, for example, 1.70, right? Okay, so now let's go back there, and then that's why when you see the code for this particular method there, and how do we draw the linkage between the two things, between the controller and the view? The way we do it is by identifying some GUI components over there. So for example, in this case, let's say the bottom. And whose ID is, let me just double check, couldn't forget. So that whose ID is bottom compute. Okay. And what you gotta do is you have to set that GUI's one of the attributes to which is called onClick. So you can retrieve inputs by passing IDs. So that's the first thing you will do, for example, for the weight, height, and name. But the second thing also is, so it's going to set onClick attributes of some GUI components to attach a block of code. Okay, in this case, we're going to attach bottom compute, which is a GUI component, and we're gonna attach this particular one. Okay, let me show you. Over here, it's called compute BMI bottom clicked. Okay, and to a block of code, compute. Okay, it's compute BMI button clicked. So that is this particular block of code over here. This particular block of code is attached to this GUI components. Okay, attached to. Okay, conceptually it's not too bad, but you should really know how to do this from Android Studio. Okay, how do you attach a particular method to some GUI components, and then how you can retrieve the values from other GUI components. Okay, now and then let's move on. And then once we have done that, we can retrieve by calling the helper method that we got over here. So far so good. And then for the fix 2 over here, and what we did in the last version, which was version 3, in which case we try to do some conversion over here by using this standard way of doing things, parse double over here. Okay, so parse the two height and weight into their numerical equivalents. And then we do something over here. So this is computation. Okay, in the case of the calculating the BMI, in the case of the BMI calculator example that we are developing now, the computation itself is very easy because it's only one line of computation, just do some simple division. However, what we are doing here is not very good in terms of a software design. It's not very good. Okay, let me try to explain to you why. Okay, if you go back to this picture here, let's see what the controller is now doing. It's doing basically two things of different natures. The first thing is it's going to somehow retrieve the inputs and then convert them if necessary. Again, so these are just some standard jobs without any intelligence, because depending on for every application, you may just use the same button or the same text view or the same text field. You can always do these conversion and retrieval in a standard way. So that's one thing. However, on the other hand, you can see that over here, computer BMI, this is really app specific. Okay, I'll write it down. This is an app specific, which means no general solution. And what's the consequence of this? So that means if you're trying to actually try to mix two things, the blue and the pink, in the same controller, it can be very confusing. So there's a golden principle for software design, which is called separation of concern. Which means you should not try to handle two different concerns in a single place. You should really try, if you're trying to handle multiple concerns in a single place, that's not a good sign. You should really move them out into separate components. This is why we have to somehow to move this part over here, the computation over here, I'll write it down here, the computation which depends on the logic of specific app should be done in a separate components. Okay, so that's why when we first introduced this model view controller design pattern over here, that's why you got controller, you got view, and you got model. Okay, so that means for this particular BMI calculator, if you mix the controller and the model, it doesn't seem to be very harmful. But we want you to learn want you to learn the proper way right in the beginning. So you should always separate out any application specific computation into the model side, which is here. Okay, so what the missing puzzle for this tutorial is, we're going to show you we do not actually want to do this particular line of code in the controller. Okay, should not be done in the context of controller because of the separation of concern principle. In general, the computation required for a specific app can be very complicated, in which case it is bad to have the controller responsible for both input retrievals and computation. It's not good for the controller to be responsible for so many things. That is, in general, we want to have a separate components responsible for computation. Okay, for computation related to the specific app. Okay, that's kind of the very brief justification why having this line of code over here is a very bad practice. So we shouldn't have that. So I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to comment this out. Okay, what we should do later is to have yet another let me say proper base 2 based on the information retrieved creates a model and let it return the computation result to be displayed. Okay, that's kind of the rough idea, and that will be the focus starting from the next video.